How we doing? How we doing? This is Destination Denver, Colorado, and listen, don't get mad for me being the bearer of bad news, but the Denver housing market is frozen and it's getting worse. We're here to talk about why, starting right now. Alright, this is Destination Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jimmy Everett. So listen, if you're interested in learning all the ins and outs, pros and cons to moving to or around the Denver Metro and Colorado Front Range, this is definitely the channel for you, and you're going to want to click that subscribe button below. And as much as I try to be informative here on camera, I'm also a licensed mortgage broker covering the entire state of Colorado and team with some of the state's most talented realtors. We're helping people move here each and every day. So the number and email you see, know that I'm always the person, answer your phone calls, answer your texts, answer your emails, there, when and if you need me. Now that we're done with that fun-filled stuff, let's get to what we're here for, and that is the state of the Denver housing market. It is frozen, and it's getting worse. So obviously housing has been a challenge nationwide. This isn't certainly a Denver issue, but when we look at Denver, we see that this is kind of the end of the frenzy, and it's the beginning of friction. So we're not talking first and foremost of a crash. And I know people love talking about a crash. And listen, I'm the first person to tell you that I have said that the housing market nationwide and certainly in Denver needed a correction for a long period of time. I am of the belief that we are in the midst of that correction and that we will eventually get to somewhat of where a person that thinks a crash is going to occur. It's just going to take longer. A correction is a more calm, steady process as opposed to this massive crash that happens overnight. So we're really welcoming people to a gridlock era where buyers can't afford to buy, sellers either can't afford to sell because they don't have enough equity, or more likely, much more likely, they don't want to sell. They have a ton of equity, they have a great rate, they don't have any pressure to sell, so they list their house for a price that they're not going to get or they're not getting, and they just decide, I'm just gonna wait it out or I'm gonna pull my house off the market altogether. And so when we talk about this bubble, and people love to say that because they love their doom porn, it's not a bubble, it's more of a traffic jam where you just have so many people bottlenecked because of interest rates, because of unknowns, because of tariffs, all of these things. So you have sellers who don't want to make a move, you have buyers who are reluctant to make a move, and nothing is moving. So right now you have more inventory, even though technically you have fewer listings going on week over week. So Denver's inventory, as of the making of this video, is up 73.1% from pre-pandemic levels. That is the highest in the nation. But don't confuse inventory with motivation. These aren't desperate sellers. These aren't people that are just trying to get rid of their house because they have no other choice. So you have listings piling up, but they're not selling. You have, as of July 25th, the median days on market hit 45 in Denver. That's a 43% jump from same time last year. That these houses are just sitting and sitting. So you have, the homes are sitting, and again, this is not because sellers are panicking, but because buyers can't move. The home prices, combined with interest rates, are still at a point where a buyer can't make offers on a lot of these houses, or if they are making an offer, it's not to the number the seller wants. The seller does not need to be desperate, so they're just sitting tight. Now, as I've said, the bubble folks, they'll talk about prices collapsing. We're not seeing prices collapsing, we are seeing some price cuts. So in June, 38.3% of listings nationwide had a price cut of one way or another. But the median sales price was pretty steady or slightly down here in Denver. So in Denver, it was $581,000 in July was the median sold price. That's down 2.4% year over year from last year. In the Denver Metro, we expand that out, the median price sat at $609,000 in July, and that was actually up 2% year over year. And so I'll try to not say this again because I've already said it like 4 or 5 times in the video, but that is this symptom of a slow, steady, gradual price correction to home prices. Now, along with this, you've seen interest rates remain high. All the talk about Fed cutting rates, which we could talk about it not affecting mortgage rates, yada, yada, yada. Mortgage rates have remained stubbornly high. between 6.5% and 7%, sometimes touching over 7%. And we've seen every time rates go above 7%, the market basically freezes. And usually when you see gradual rate decreases, like you have as of the making of this video, I'm making this on the 5th of August, you've seen rates trickle down into the mid to high sixes on a conventional 30-year fixed loan average again. So with that, you start to see that homes, while cutting prices, are more likely to offer concessions to buyers. So concessions, if you're not familiar, is essentially money that's financed within a loan, and it allows the sellers to pay for the buyers to do things, whether that is paying for their closing costs, lowering their interest rate temporarily or permanently. And so more and more listings are offering these concessions. They're saying, hey, if you buy this house, we'll give you 10 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand to cover some of these costs for you. The thing that causes these numbers, when we talk about median home prices, to be skewed is that concessions, for you and me just looking on Zillow at a sold property, we're not gonna see that seller gave the buyer $10,000, $20,000. We're just gonna see the total home price. So for lenders and real estate agents, what we look at is the price to sold value. And let's say during the pandemic when rates were really low, you would see the list price at 100%, and then the home would sell for 101, 102, 103% of that original list price. Now it's reversed. A home might be listed at 100% of that, expected value in the beginning, and now it's selling for 99, 98, 97% of that value. And a lot of times those are those concessions. So in the first quarter of 2025, roughly 60%, just below 60%, or 6 out of every 10 homes that sold had some level of concessions given, where again, the sellers were giving part of their equity to the buyers. Rather than lowering the price, they were giving them this money, and that was usually to lower the interest rate in one way, shape, or form, whether it was temporary or permanent. So the average concession given during that period of time was a little over $7,000. Again, nationwide, that was the average. A little more than 7 grand given to the buyers in order to afford the home. And that has a much larger impact for most people on their payment than simply lowering the price of the home. So as an example, you'll oftentimes see these examples where, if you lower the price of the home by $15,000, it's gonna save you roughly $90 a month savings on principal and interest. Whereas if you take $15,000 in concessions and you apply it to, for example, a 2-1 buy down, now you're saving $700 a month in that first year payment. Now, listen, you'll see these comparisons a lot, and I use that as an example. We're not talking about a specific interest rate, anything like that. The one thing I've always talked about is that while we're comparing these temporary, permanent interest rate buy downs, it's also how are people using these funds. Some people are using that for, again, these temporary buy downs, something that is going to buy them literally a little bit of time. It's going to buy them 12 months, 24 months. Maybe they know that their income is going to go up. Maybe they know that other debt is going to go away over that period of time, and so they're going to be able to afford more. There are hopefully just a small group of people who are just strictly banking on the fact that interest rates are going to come down and they're going to be able to refinance. I have for multiple years thought that was a terrible strategy. Hope is not a strategy. So how these people are using those concessions certainly matter in the grand scheme of things. And I will say from experience that sellers who are working to help buyers solve the problem of affordability are tending to be the sellers whose homes are selling. But we still have to deal with this gridlock. How are homes slowly but surely piling up on the market? Right now, as of, again, the making of this video, we have roughly 14,000 homes in the Denver metro area for sale, and over 81% of the mortgages out, again, nationwide, sit at an interest rate of below 6%. Over 53%, over half the mortgages in this nation have an interest rate of below 4%. So for these sellers, if they don't have to move, they're not. And many of them, even if they thought about selling the house, can turn the property into an investment property as they move, and they can cash flow from it. So there is very little desperation, which is not a bad thing. We don't want a bunch of people selling the home out of desperation. That's bad. So you have this situation where buyers want something, they can't quite afford it, and sellers, they kind of want to sell it, but they want a certain number before they're going to say yes. And in some cases, home sellers are financially stuck because selling their house means that they are trading for maybe an upgrade in the house, but a much larger payment. In some instances, we have people who are actually selling to downsize, and even though they're moving into a smaller house, their payment remains exactly the same than it was on this bigger mortgage because of the higher interest rate. So the result is you have low seller motivation and you have inventory builds from homes that won't move. Not because they're new supply, but just because they've been sitting on the market for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Now, as far as a macro sense, this is not just, again, certainly a Denver problem. July, nationwide, you are seeing a slowdown. A lot of this is going to be based on the economy. So in July, we added just 73,000 jobs to our economy. That was the lowest in more than 2 years. Employment ticked up to 4.2%, but you also have to keep in mind that what they're seeing is that people who haven't been part of the workforce are ceasing or stopping looking for jobs. That's horrible English that I just practiced. They have stopped looking for new employment. So when we take that unemployment of 4.2%, it's not counting a lot of these people who have decided to just not go back to work for the moment. And Colorado's unemployment is underperforming the nation, which used to not be the case. We used to be below. Currently, we sit at 4.7% unemployment in a state where affordability was already very challenging. And as of the making of this video, our job growth sits at only 0.4%. It's 43rd in the nation out of obviously your 50 states. So not great at the moment. And we've seen this is a reoccurring theme, especially in your high cost areas, but nationwide, wages have not kept up with home prices, especially in trade, especially in construction, especially in services. People that are in those occupations are falling behind the cost of living cycle. Add to this, yes, the tariff squeeze, and builders are slowly but surely starting to feel that. So we talk about Trump era tariffs in 2025, whether they were going to be asserted, whether they're not, whether they were going to be adjusted or not. So some of those tariffs include 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum. That's not great for home builders. You have wide-ranging tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, Canada. These are countries that we rely on for a lot of these building materials. And listen, we can get into politics on a separate video. I'm just speaking economic facts that is going to affect home builders. Home builders are squeezed. The National Association of Home Builders says that tariffs by themselves add roughly $11,000, $10,900 per home that is built. And while the National Association of Home Builders say that, CoreLogic, who collects a lot of this information, they say that the total cost increase will be between $17,000 to $22,000 per new home built. Multifamily starts in the city of Denver are down 50% or more this year. And that is one of the type of products of homes that we most need, is multiple doors in one building, or you have, townhomes, condos. Multifamily are important to create more housing, and the starts, the new construction of those is down 50%. So you have tariffs plus rates equaling fewer newer homes, and there's no long-term affordability fix. The other thing to consider when we're talking about these new builds and their cost, new builds are one of the few examples, if you will, within the housing market where these builders are providing pretty massive incentives for people to work with the builder. Whether it's reducing price, whether it's giving them a ton of money towards their mortgage to lower their interest rate. I mean, they are cutting as much as they can from their revenue in order to give to the buyer, in order to get this product sold. So as you talk about their expense going higher, they only have so much threshold. At the end of the day, the company has to be profitable in order to keep making new houses. And as that shrinks, again, that's why you see new starts for multifamily down 50%. That's why you see new starts in general down. And then, obviously regulation hopefully would protect to some extent, but you start to see any company that has an issue paying for a product to be built has to find different ways to cut costs. And so you start thinking about what qualities are you going to start to reduce. By no means am I saying that homes aren't going to be safe, but some of those nice finishes, some of those things that you would expect from a new construction home, they have to go away or you're paying for it. The builders just can't keep eating all of that cost. And don't even get me started on regulation. Colorado is already one of the most regulated states, and the amount of cost that goes to builders, not that I just side with builders, but the amount of cost they already take on is pretty alarming. And listen, for the folks that say, oh, you know, the Fed's gonna come in and they're gonna cut rates and it's gonna save the day. Listen, the Fed isn't your savior. And lower rates will not save the market. The Fed cut rates 3 times in late 2024. And what did mortgage rates do? They stayed stuck. They stayed around 7%. Mortgage rates tend to follow the 10-year treasury, and investors in the 10-year treasury didn't buy it. They didn't lower their expectations, so mortgage rates stayed the same. And also, as these treasuries, these are all bond investors. And listen, if they get spooked by inflation, if they get spooked by debt, and the treasury oversupply, they're not going to invest in it. So until Wall Street chills out, Main Street is not going to get any relief. Now, as I make this video, again, August 5th, just last Friday, we got, as I mentioned, a bad jobs report, 73,000 jobs in July. We also got 2 brutal revisions. Again, by the time you see this video, you've probably heard all of this noise. So brutal revisions, bad for the economy, good for mortgage rates. I have a tough time, as much as I rely on mortgage rates to make a living, I have a tough time celebrating mortgage rates improving when it's really bad news for the economy. Having said that, the Fed will meet again in September, some expectations of cuts there. One thing that I would warn people of, if the Fed drastically cuts rates in September, that does not mean, again, that these investors in the 10-year treasury are going to go for it. If they feel that the Fed is acting in a panic, if they have any concern about inflation coming back, the 10-year treasury is going to go up, and that means mortgage rates should go up. So here are 3 futures I see to potentially add to your headache. So first, rates remain the same. We remain mid to high 6s, up to 7%. The gridlock continues. There's low volume, there's a slow pace of sales. Home sellers have to accept the fact that if they genuinely want to sell their house, it's likely not what they think it's worth. They're not going to get the dollar that they thought they were going to. The second scenario is that rates drop into the low 6s. Let's say 6% up to about 6.4%. That's, to me, a head fake rally. That is going to bring some buyers out of the woodwork. It's going to get some sellers excited. You're going to see a surge in inventory because you're going to have more people who decide, okay, we weren't going to sell our house, but now rates have gotten better, so we're going to list, we're going to try to buy a house. So it's going to give us some momentum, but with buyers rushing in and inventory still tight, you're going to have some short-term bidding wars on certain properties, not across the board, but you're going to have some short-term bidding wars as people get more acquainted, and that is going to be worsening for affordability. The last thing that I could see happening, which again, I do not believe this occurs unless we have some really, really bad economic news that none of us want to see, and that is that rates drop significantly. They drop below 6 into the mid 5s. Then you talk about this great unlocking that begins. You talk about sellers coming out. Again, you talk about inventory surging. I think if you have rates in the low 6s, it's still kind of tight. You get rates into the 5s, inventory surges initially. Prices could actually drop more because of this in the short term, but then you're going to see these buyers gobble it up. One thing I am fascinated by, one thing I'm really trying to wrap my head around, during the pandemic, there was so much buyer activity and they had to make decisions so quickly that you had these brutally unhealthy bidding wars. You had situations where people were paying tens of thousands, 50,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars more than the house was listed for. What it was worth, we could have a debate about. But you had people who just to some extent lost all logic and reason. They wanted a house, they had the money, they paid every penny they possibly could towards it. And I think there is, to a great extent, there's a lot of reluctance in that now, especially for people who have even considered if they might have to sell the house. So the question I have, that there's only one way we will find out, is as rates come down, how eager are these people who may have experienced that or heard a lot about that, how eager will they be to jump right back into that type of situation? If you overpaid, or if you paid, $25,000, $50,000 more than a house was listed for, 4 or 5 years ago, how eager are you to do that in any way, shape, or form again? Will people be reluctant, or will they dive in? It will be interesting to see. And in all of this, listen, you're gonna have winners, you're gonna have losers, you're gonna have strategic survivors. The winners, listen, all cash buyers, they tend to win. They don't have to worry about interest rates. They can buy as they want. They can move quickly. They can negotiate deep discounts. Other winners, long-term investors. People who see past short-term chaos. And when I say long-term investors, that includes just your general home buyer. Someone who recognizes that I might not get the price I want, might not get the interest rate I want today, but I'm gonna be in this house for 5+ years, perhaps 10+ years, and over time, I'm going to win. And then last, certainly strategic buyers. People who have mastered concessions. They know what they get. They're not just about price, they're about the total value of the house. What can I get for price? What can I get for concessions? How can I make that work for me? You're losers. And listen, I hate to put it that way, but you're first-time home buyers who are dealing with down payment hurdles, who are dealing with affordability. The payment just doesn't make sense. You're buying, you look at a house that you like, you're running scenarios with the resources you have, and the payment just isn't getting anywhere close to where you want. Those are the people that are unfortunately on the losing end of this situation, and will continue to be as long as affordability and home prices remain high. And then certainly sellers who are just flat out delusional. People who think that their house is worth what they saw on a Z estimate 4 years ago, where they think, hey, I saw it. My house, it said, was worth $600,000. And 4 years later, with higher interest rates, you're not gonna tell me that my house is now worth $520 instead of $600. So as long as we have that delusion, those people are going to continue to lose. And you see many of them where they have moved from their listing just sitting on the market to flat out purgatory. And then you have survivors. Then you have sellers who price right, who prep their house like a pro, who offer payment-based incentives to potential buyers, who tell them, hey, we'll buy your interest rate down to this, we'll give you a temporary buy down for this. Again, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of temporary buy downs unless your situation is specific, but regardless, people who are trying as best they can to solve two problems at once. We want to sell our house and we want it at a good value, but we also want you to be able to afford the house so that you buy it. And survivors are buyers that understand math, that understand that they have to get creative to some extent with their financing. I'm not talking about anything ruthless and certainly nothing predatory, but they understand that we got to be smart about it. We got to negotiate smart, perhaps not that aggressive. Also, listen, buyers who understand that that odds are you're not going to go to a seller and get them to knock $100,000 off the purchase price. And trust me, we're getting a lot of people who have that in their head. Much like the delusional seller who thinks their house is worth what it was in 2021, yes, you have some home buyers who have watched a couple YouTube videos on housing crashes, and all of a sudden they think that they're just gonna get a seller to just completely drop their pants. And that, again, with some very rare exception, is just not happening. And nor am I for that. I do not believe in the win and lose scenario when it comes to real estate. I believe that a seller and a buyer can both win if they negotiate with some level of ethics. So to wrap up, listen, I'm not gonna tell you stop waiting, get out there and buy a house. What I am gonna tell you is stop waiting to prepare. Stop waiting to be aware of what is happening. And if you have any thoughts of selling or buying your house in the future, you need to start doing your due diligence, even if that transaction itself, even if that process itself is months, if not years away. The market is not crashing. It is certainly calcifying at the moment. It is frozen. This is not about timing the bottom. It's about understanding the game. These people who have these 3%, 4% like rate, fantasies, folks, it's not happening. And you can wait as long as you want. If you want to wait for 3 or 4% interest rates, I'll probably talk to you in my next lifetime. That's cool. The truth is this stuck market is to some extent the new normal, and you'll hear normal a lot of times. Because you can't have, nationwide we had appreciation of roughly 45%. And in certain areas like Austin, Texas, it was around 70%. In 30 months, you had home prices increase by by 45 to 70%. We couldn't possibly have imagined that we were just going to keep growing off of that. Some of that money had to be given back. Home prices have to come down to some extent. Again, crash is fast, correction slow and gradual. I don't think it quite gets us to where you would imagine a crash would be, but it gets us closer to that affordability gap that we need narrowed. And more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, you don't need luck, you need strategy. And if I can help with any of that, if you have any questions at all, it's a great time to hit me up. The number and email you see below, know that I'm always the person, answer those phone calls, answer those texts, answer those emails. They're winning if you need me. This is Destination Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jimmy Everett. That was the Denver housing market froze, and it's getting worse. Till I see you next time. Peace.